Hello and welcome to the Spiked podcast. I'm Tom Slater, editor of Spiked, filling in for Fraser Myers, who's taking a well-earned holiday this week, but delighted to be joined on the show today by Spiked contributor and broadcaster Candice Holdsworth. How are you doing, Candice?
I am good, thank you.
And Freddy Gray, deputy editor of The Spectator.
Hello, Tom. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Coming up on today's show, we discuss the crimes of Hunter Biden, the schoolgirl who identifies as a cat, and the Man United fan arrested for mocking Hillsborough. So to begin with, let's talk about Hunter Biden, Freddie, an incredibly, oddly significant figure in American politics, everyone's favourite crack-smoking, curb-crawling, wheeler-dealer son of the current president of the United States. He has just pleaded guilty to a string of charges following this investigation centering around not paying his taxes for a couple of years in a row, as well as this slightly confusing charge around lying on a form about not being addicted to drugs in order to procure a firearm, which gives you a little bit of a sense of the kind of individual that we're talking about, I suppose. But I know you've written about Hunter Biden and these charges. What's going on with him, to those who might not have been following this quite colourful character over the course of recent years?
Because I'm a grubby person, I love grubby stories about real wrong-uns. And I think everybody who's like me likes these types of things should just stand back and applaud what an amazing wrong-un Hunter Biden is. I mean, this is a crack addict, struggles with addiction, etc. No one should joke about that. But he has a fondness for making porn films with prostitutes. He shacked up with his brother's widow very briefly after his brother's death to be closer to his brother,
as you
according to him. Yeah, and then hit on the sister of the wife. I think we can say hit on legally because the texts are out there. He's just had an amazingly depraved life, and his memoir, which I've read, is this extraordinary sort of harrowing tale, and it was reviewed by everyone as this beautiful story. But really, it was it was amazingly self-serving work. And I think a lot of Republicans now, because he's taken this plea deal, they're calling it a sweetheart plea deal.
Because he's not going to go to prison or anything.
He's not going to go to prison. And of course, the comparison is with Donald Trump. It's not a very good comparison because Hunter Biden isn't running to be president. But it is interesting that the son of the president, and the president, Joe Biden, is head of the Department of Justice, has got this very light sentence for crimes that any other person would probably spend a long time in jail for. And the fact that Donald Trump could face imprisonment for the rest of his life under the Espionage Act for hoarding boxes. Admittedly, boxes are very highly classified documents that might imperil national security and so on. But there is just this difference between the way Democrats and the children of Democrats are treated by the legal system at the highest levels of politics, and the way Republicans are. And I think Republicans are right to sort of say this is a bit ridiculous.
I mean, especially when you think about what Hunter Biden has been accused of. I mean, I feel like anyone would assume this. They've lived in America or went to America, evaded taxes for a couple of years, got addicted to crack cocaine, lied and purchased a gun, then was actually filmed with a prostitute brandishing said gun, and then loses the gun across the road from a school, you probably expect to go to prison. So the fact that he's evaded that as a consequence of all this seems a little bit strange. But I suppose, just to push back a little bit, could two things be true at the same time here, insofar as it does seem that Hunter Biden has been given a ridiculously sweet deal here. There's also been allegations from whistleblowers, I believe, that the investigation into him have become increasingly politicised. Joe Biden was making kind of interventions saying that he throughout the investigation, saying that he believed his son and so on. Understandable in one ways, but also he is the president of the United States. Could it be that, on the one hand, Hunter Biden could easily have just been given preferential treatment, but that on Trump's side, on this particular case, around those records, he might be more bang to rights than some of his supporters might like to?
I think so. I think this is, if anything's going to get Trump, this might be the one. He does seem to have this like Gollum-like desire to hoard stuff, and I think it got the better of him here. But the Hunter story that's really interesting, I mean, the crack stuff and the porn and sex and whatever is titillating, but it doesn't mean anything really. The Hunter Biden story that's important is what he was doing with this investment fund he set up with John Kerry's son. And that is really quite suspicious. And the House Oversight Committee, which is now led by Republicans, has been looking into this, and they are digging up some pretty, unless they're making these documents up, and there's no evidence that they are, the bank wire transfers that they've dug up are quite alarming or intriguing, whichever way you look at it. And I mean, for instance, a Chinese entity, 3 months after Joe Biden resigned as vice president in 2017, made a wire transfer to a family associate of the Biden family, and he then distributed the funds from his own account to various members of the Biden family. It's not entirely clear which ones, but a couple are known about. That is a bit suspicious. There's also a lot of Ukraine money that seems to have come into Hunter Biden's pocket, and then also may have gone elsewhere. There's allegations that maybe it's all very murky. Nobody quite knows. And what I find extraordinary is that you've got this incredibly tabloid, interesting figure of Hunter Biden, and it's only the New York Post, which is a right-wing publication, and a bit of Fox News that talk about it, and then obviously the Trump media do it too. But among the rest of the press, there's just complete silence about this. So you've got the tabloid element, complete silence about the actual genuine, possibly huge scandal, which might allegedly, possibly might mean that Joe Biden was basically taking money for selling out America's national interest, which is it's a serious allegation. I think you can now make it. A lot of Republicans are now making it. And that's just not really being talked about. It's very odd.
It's very, very strange. And you mentioned the New York Post there. And of course, we would be remiss if we didn't mention the suppression of the story about the Hunter Biden laptop, which was really striking because it also plays to a lot of the things you've been talking about as far as the sort of attempt to suppress criticism, not probably of Hunter Biden himself, but the concern that because that story was about to come out in the course of the run-up to the election, that it was going to be embarrassing, that there were all of these kind of former national security heads who kind of got together to basically present it as Russian disinformation, that this laptop with its evidence not just of Hunter Biden's sexual exploits, but also of his kind of wheeler dealing in Ukraine and elsewhere. Candice, do you reckon particularly the kind of American liberal media, have they even come to terms with, even noticed that particular story? Because it just, in terms of an issue of big tech censorship, it was so terrifying. The New York Post was locked out of its Twitter account. You couldn't even share the story on DMs and so on. Like, it was really total, and yet it feels like everyone involved just walked away from the crime scene where that one is involved.
Definitely. There's been no reckoning with that. I mean, when the Twitter files came out and you actually saw the decision-making that was going on at Twitter in regards to the story, it was like it was some dodgy spam link from somewhere, not the New York Post, and a proper investigation by a proper journalist. I mean, it was total censorship. And yes, no one else wanted to believe it was true. I mean, such as the deep partisanship in America, people were very, very, very willing to just believe it was a conspiracy theory or dismiss it. And then I think it was only a year later, the New York Times did a little piece on it that was saying basically that some of the documents taken from the laptop are 100% true. They're not forgery. And then it's suddenly like, okay, now it's acceptable to talk about and we can acknowledge it. And that's one of the big problems. People are just in these information bubbles now. I mean, this is a huge story. It's a massive story. The stuff that came off Hunter Biden's laptop, like you were saying, why was he on the board of an energy company? I mean, the guy had absolutely no expertise in that area. There's someone referred to in the documents as the big guy. We don't know who it is. Some people speculate that it's Joe Biden. It needs to be investigated. It really, really does. But I'm not holding out much hope that it will be.
And also what's interesting is this idea that because a lot of senior Democrats now are coming to accept that Biden is too doddery to go on, the sort of word in Washington, you hear these rumors in Washington that they might use the Hunter Biden, they might get interested in the Hunter Biden story as a way of sort of parking, getting Joe Biden out of the way. I find people in journalism talking about that publicly is such a weird phenomenon. It's like, yes, there's obviously this huge scandal, but we'll only use it because we've got to get rid of Joe Biden. It's not, I mean, the cynicism of it is extraordinary. And the fact that no one's interested in what actually happened and whether the Biden family were hawking the national interest to China and Ukraine or elements within Ukraine it's mind-boggling.
And it does feel like Hunter Biden from the office kind of tapped into that profound sort of skepticism a lot of people, particularly Trump supporters or Republicans, had when it came to the Democrats, because it really sort of symbolizes the fact that as much as people were saying, not without cause, that Trump is quite crooked in many respects and probably has at least a handful of cases that he's going to have to answer for over the course of his life, it's still the fact that accusation almost bounced off a lot of his supporters, I think, because they looked at the Bidens or they looked at the Clintons to a slightly different degree and thought they're all in it for themselves anyway. It just feels like his significance, this kind of the extent to which American democratic politics is just so based on these kind of various different, almost like royal families that seem to operate.
Yeah.
It's so striking. But in terms of what's happening next with Hunter Biden, there's obviously this particular investigation is drawing to a close, it seems like.
Well, the judge hasn't accepted the plea deal yet, and he might not. I don't think we know who the judge is yet. I think we'll find that out soon. And then he probably will accept it. And then essentially it is what all the Republicans are saying, which is a slap on the wrist for Hunter Biden. Naughty boy, shouldn't have done that. I don't think he'll be allowed to have a gun for a while. But then after that, I mean, I don't think the House Oversight Committee, which is now led by Republicans, are going to give up. They've said they won't. So they're going to keep digging into this stuff. But again, what's amazing is they've already dug up very interesting stuff and just there's no real interest. We might get something in the New York Times in the next 3 months. But then, again, that could well be because the New York Times has decided it wants to get rid of Joe Biden.
And that's the only context in which they'll happily talk about it.
The only reason why they would expose this truth is so they can plant another Democratic president.
It's incredible. As you all know, we at Spiked are dogged campaigners against big tech censorship. It is now the weapon of choice for the elites to silence dissenting voices, which is why we cover it week in, week out. Free speech isn't the only thing that needs defending online, however. Your privacy is also at risk. We should all be worried about the fact that Silicon Valley is also constantly snooping on our internet activity. But you don't have to accept this tyranny. I use ExpressVPN to fight back against big tech's overreach every day, and you should too. Even if you're not worried about things you say online, big tech is still tracking everything that you do. Companies like Google and Facebook know what you're searching for, which videos you're watching, and every site that you visit. They can then match your activity to your true identity using your device's unique IP address. But when I use ExpressVPN, no one can see my IP address at all. My identity is anonymized by a secure VPN server. Plus, ExpressVPN encrypts 100% of my network traffic, so I'm protected from hackers and eavesdroppers as well. ExpressVPN is also really easy to use. No matter what device I'm using it on, the app literally has just one button. You tap it and you're protected. It's that simple. ExpressVPN is not just the number one rated VPN by CNET and TechRadar, it's also the best VPN that I've ever tried. I never go online without it. So, don't give big tech the power to control your information. Protect yourself now with ExpressVPN. Plus, we have a very special offer for Spike listeners. You'll get 3 months for free if you use our special URL. Just go to expressvpn.com/spiked. That's expressvpn.com/spiked to get your 3 months for free. One more time, that's expressvpn.com/spiked. So let's turn back to the UK for a moment, because there's been an incredible story, which has been running for 3, 4, maybe 5 days now, about a school in East Sussex, a secondary school, at which an incredible exchange took place between a teacher and 2 schoolgirls there, which was recorded and now leaked. In it, you can hear 2 schoolgirls essentially kind of pushing back against what sounds like rampant gender ideology at this particular school. They express skepticism that one of their classmates is actually a cat, because she identifies as a cat. They say such heretical things as men have penises and women have vaginas. The teacher then castigates them, says they're being despicable, suggests that they should find another school. The government have had to intervene. The DfE have launched an investigation. Candice, what's going on here?
I mean, this is just like the Alice in Wonderland path that gender ideology has led us down, where saying something as simple as men have penises, women have vaginas, you can't identify as a cat, then becomes worthy of a government investigation. It's insanity. I mean, some people have said, no, they're not serious when they identify as cats. They know they're winding their teachers up. Mm-hmm. But the fact that you can wind a teacher up with that says something, right? I mean, when we were at school, if we'd done stuff like that, our teachers would have laughed at us. They would have rolled their eyes and batted us away. But now teachers are really po-faced. I mean, when you listen to that audio exchange with those girls, the way that they were talking to her, they came across as really sensible. Yep. I mean, I would have been proud if those were my children. It shows them critical, questioning. She sounded so childish. She really did. I'm glad that they recorded it. You know, we live in an era now where it's feelings before facts. And this whole idea, this bizarre idea that you can just identify as anything. I mean, what does that even mean? You don't identify with gravity. It exists independently of how you feel about it.
Mm-hmm. What an outrageous suggestion. Freddie, what have you made of this unfolding story, because it has moved on as well, because because there was this one revelation, it sparked others, that at other schools students had been identifying a thing as horses, planetary moons, all kinds of inanimate objects as well. Where to begin?
Yeah. You
going to do
horses,
the rest.
I should have done.
Yeah, I was going to say. I don't know how you would do a moon.
I don't. I mean,
in fact, don't.
I think Candice has said everything I think there is to say about it. I mean, it is obviously utterly preposterous, and the fact that the children are the grown-ups now, and the grown-ups are just completely insane. It's. I mean, what I find odd about these stories is they're sort of culture war stories, but I just can't find anyone. I know that there are people in the stories, and there's people online complaining, but you just don't meet anyone who's on the side of the cat people in this. I just don't, or the cat children. I just the kittens, I should say. I don't think that there are those people. I think it's just something that, and everybody loves these kids that stick up for themselves because they sound sane, and that's what we want. And it's almost like we're all so childish. We want to elevate sort of child teacher figures to speak sense to us because we can't make sense ourselves. But yes, it's obviously completely mad.
It's been interesting as well, because when it first sort of broke, there was people just generally just asserting, this must be fake. This can't have possibly happened. I mean, is there a risk of just taking one teacher who got a little bit carried away and treating it as an example of everything that's going on? Or would that be to dismiss the fact that things have gotten so bad that a teacher does feel that they have the right not just to assert a pretty batty view in the classroom, but to punish pupils for expressing a much more commonsensical view on these things?
Well, Catherine Birbelsing, who's the head of the Michaela School, she said people said the same thing to her when she started speaking out about this stuff. No, that doesn't happen. Don't be ridiculous. Apparently it is quite prevalent. I mean, the furry stuff, I think that's quite new. But especially stuff with gender, I think teachers feel very boxed in about what they can do. I mean, you've got this new guidance coming out about how teachers should handle this in schools in terms of socially transitioning children. I think the problem is up until now, like you were saying, you don't really know people who think this is okay. I honestly think it's lobby groups and activist groups who've shaped a lot of the guidance around this stuff. I mean, that was the case with men in women's prisons, for instance. I mean, it was just some very extreme group who held very extreme views who were shaping the prison policy on this. I mean, it does not reflect ordinary opinion at all. But I think it's just a tragedy that, you even have to have guidance regarding this stuff. I mean, it should be the most obvious thing in the world.
I think also in a odd way, probably an unconscious way, it becomes a way in which the trans debate in schools becomes legitimized. Because I think everybody eventually goes, well, obviously the kittens thing is a bit extreme, but we do really need to focus on allowing kids to identify as whatever gender they want. And so that sort of shifts the parameters of the debate a bit. And I think there might be a bit of that going on, because I think a lot of people are starting to accept a highly progressivist idea on kids and trans issues that, I find appalling. But I think a lot of my peers now are saying, well, this is just the future, and you don't want to be reactionary and get in the way of it.
And it does feel like that. It's just because it's the high status opinion. People are rubbing on. They haven't really thought about it for more than 5 minutes. But Candice, what do you think about the scope for a kind of pushback, particularly from government? I suppose, as you were saying, there's this new schools guidance which has been issued, which pretty meekly suggests that you shouldn't socially transition a child, refer to he or she using their new pronouns and names without first talking to the parents. That seems like a pretty reasonable thing. Of course, it's been responded to with outrage and hysteria, is always want to happen. But do you think that the government are in a place to push back on this a little bit? It's interesting that in a way, Rishi Sunak has been a bit bolder on this than even some of his predecessors. He even made a women with penises joke in recent weeks, which is a potentially good sign. But obviously they can't do much of anything at the moment, but do you think they've got their heart in the right place?
Great that's
on
the
this issue.
It could be a good prime minister. He made a women with penises joke.
The bar has become that low at this point. But
this is where we are. Up is down, down is up. I think it's mostly coming from parents, anecdotally speaking. I think it's good that the government's now saying that it should be up to parents. For instance, if a child wants to change their pronouns or whatever, even if the teachers are worried about what the parent's reaction would be, it doesn't matter. You have to learn to manage it, because it's not good. It's not good to help a child be at odds with their parents. It just isn't, even if their parents, are not the most enlightened people in the world. And then in regards to sex education and things like that, they were withholding material from the parents. now they have to share it. I honestly think that most of this is going to come from parents just becoming more involved and the schools having to get used to that, because I think the schools keep them at arm's length. So the government really saying you have to involve the parents more and more and more. That's the only way. And that's what happened in America, right? You know, this is what happened. The parents got together and they became a powerful force.
I just wanted to let you know that Brendan O'Neill's new book, A Heretics Manifesto, is back in stock on Amazon. Also, if you want to get a hold of a signed copy of the book, our special offer is still running. If you donate £50 or more to Spiked, you can get your hands on a signed copy for free, and it will be delivered straight to your door while stocks last. To donate your £50 and to get a hold of your signed copy of A Heretics Manifesto, just go to spiked-online.com/donate. That's spiked-online.com/donate. And also, we'll throw in a year's access to Spiked supporters. That's our online donor community, which comes with all kinds of other brilliant perks, just as a way of saying thank you.
Let's move on to our final story of the day, which is, when we're talking about free speech cases, actually quite a difficult case these days, because of the fact that, you know, saying that your school friend can't identify as a cat can potentially get you chastised. The people you tend to defend when it comes to free speech are often quite amiable people, gender critical feminists who want to say that women can't have penises and so on. But in the form of James White, who's a 33-year-old Man United fan who was arrested at the FA Cup final earlier this month. This is a genuinely outrageous and unsavoury character. So he attended the FA Cup final wearing a Man United replica shirt. On the back was 97 not enough, in a pretty clear reference to the Hillsborough disaster, at which 97 Liverpool fans tragically and preventively lost their lives. He was sort of snapped and then instantly went around social media. People complained to the police. He was pretty promptly arrested. And on Monday, in a court in London, he pleaded guilty to essentially a kind of public order offence on the back of his shirt. He's an incredibly difficult person to defend, as far as he was laughing in the dock. Apparently, it seemed to be one massive joke to him. He even told the police officer who arrested him that they'd misunderstood the shirt because it was in honour of his grandfather, who had died at the age of 97 and hadn't had enough children. So really a kind of low life by many stretches of the imagination. But surely, Freddie, anyone who cares about free speech should be concerned about the fact that what is essentially a grotesque joke, even if it's a genuinely grotesque joke, could lead to a situation where you're found guilty in a court of law, and in his case, escaped jail, but still has a conviction as a consequence of that.
Didn't they track down the grandfather, and he died at 50 or something?
I hadn't seen that.
I think they
another plot twist.
He didn't think anyone would bother to check.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a kind of Hunter Biden level wrong, but it is a sick joke, and you're allowed to make sick jokes, even if they're really gross. I mean, a lot of stand-up comedians make a lot of money off sick jokes. And just because he's not a professional stand-up comedian doesn't stop him from doing it. And wearing it as a shirt, there are lots of hideous, offensive T-shirts in the world. It's not something you should be arrested for. And as you wrote on your excellent piece for the Spectator today, free speech is for scumbags too. And if it isn't, then there's no point in having it.
Yes, it's tested at the edges, right? It's these cases that test your full commitment to it. I remember someone saying to me, but if you stand for free speech, you have to stand up for really grotty examples. I'm like, yeah, that's what free speech is about. Exactly. And one of my issues is I think we're getting more and more used to turning to the law, turning to the police, to police opinion. And with non-crime hate incidents, for instance, the subjectivity of it is alarming. I mean, gender critical, we're back to that. People being questioned by the police for using the incorrect pronouns. And this is where we're at now. This is where this has led us. And I know that most people would agree that what this guy said is hateful, but it does set a precedent that anyway, someone like that most likely would have got their comeuppance anyway. I mean, you're walking around with a shirt like that, you're inviting a slap. And that probably would have taught him a better lesson.
And I think, this went wrong, like many things, in the Blair years, because incitement to violence was sort of melded with incitement to hatred. And incitement to hatred, in my opinion, is not strong enough grounds for a legal conviction very often.
It's so much more slippery. I mean, incitement can be slippery anyway.
It's a very slippery concept.
You're talking about mind reading, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's absolute madness that most people as well reacting to this story are now like, well, fair enough. I mean, what he did was totally unacceptable. So, it's a sick joke. It's unacceptable. It doesn't make it criminal or something that needs to be punished by the law.
And that's such an important point, because it does feel like we're kind of losing that distinction between, I find this absolutely reprehensible, disgusting. I think the vast majority of people, at Wembley that day would have found it disgusting, probably would have,
I wouldn't have got
demonstrated with it. Yeah, I mean, it was one of those things. I think that's why probably why he got away with it, is because of the fact that, it was relatively subtle as these things go. But you do think we are just losing that distinction between, this is horrible, but at the same time, the law shouldn't be involved in dealing with this bloke. As you said, there's somewhat more old-fashioned ways you can deal with people who are genuinely making an ass of themselves. And I suppose it's one of those things where, in a case like this, you can understand, particularly people, the Hillsborough families and so on, fought for many, many years for the truth to come out and so on. It's very deep kind of, and still quite recent pain for a lot of people in Merseyside and so on. But it is, again, it's just the fact that if that becomes the bar for censorship, it's still a subjective standard by which we're allowing things to be censored. And also, because we struggle with these hard cases, we shouldn't be surprised when the seemingly more crazy cases, like the gender critical feminists or anyone else, come around, because of the fact that you can't break freedom of speech up into nice, easy chunks and say this is acceptable and this isn't acceptable to censor. But do you feel like we're in a good place? I always feel, Candice, that on the one hand, there's a lot more discussion about the issue with free speech, but at the same time, it seems to be getting worse and worse all the time. Is that about?
It's always just down to feelings again. I mean, we need to protect hurt feelings. Yes, someone may have seen that shirt and felt upset. Okay, I'm sure they'll have gotten over it. I don't know. I sometimes feel like there's less strident support for free speech now. Although, having said that, with a lot of the stuff that's gone on with social media, where people are being censored and people can see now that actually this is something quite sinister and is a real threat to freedom, there is that kind of awareness growing, which I hope will allow people to see just how bad it is to cede these very fundamental liberties to external authorities.
Thank you so much for watching the Spiked podcast. We'll be back next Friday. If you hit subscribe and click the bell, you'll never miss an episode. And in the meantime, why not check out all of Spiked's other videos and podcasts on this channel? And for more Spiked content, find us at spiked-online.com.